Alright, so welcome everyone to this chess talk. So today, as part of this chess talk, we'll be just going over one of the games that was played a while ago, and we'll be analyzing the position. Right, so that's what we'll be doing for today's session. How this game was played, what were some of the nuances of the position, and how to conduct a very common pawn structure that occurs on the chessboard, which is isolated queen pawn. So, a few sessions ago, we saw how to play against the isolated queen pawn. Today, we are going to see how to play with an isolated queen pawn. So, for those of you who don't know what an isolated queen pawn structure is, let me just show you what that looks like. Um, oops, piece path, pattern, pawn structure. Right. So if you see this top right board, right, on this side, um, this will show you an isolated queen pawn. So the pawn on d4 square, this pawn is an isolated queen pawn. And the reason it is isolated because there are no pawns, there are no white pawns on the adjacent files. So usually a pawn island, right? So this pawn on d4 is like a one pawn island. A pawn island is differentiated by a group of pawns which are connected by adjacent files. So a3 and b2 is like one pawn island. h3, g2, f2 is another pawn island, and d4, a single pawn, is itself uh, a pawn island. So what's special about this pawn island? Well, the most compelling reason for studying this pawn structure, like an isolated queen pawn, is that it's in the center, right? It's not special because it's isolated, it's special because it's in center. Usually isolated pawns are considered weaknesses, right? So let's say if we had an isolated pawn on the B or A file, it would have been considered a big weakness. But since this is a central pawn, apart from being a weakness, it also becomes a strength because it's occupying one of the central squares. And as you can see, there are no pawns of black in the center. So that's why this central pawn is like is both. It's a strategical strength as well as a weakness. And whether it's a weakness or a strength will strictly depend on how you conduct the game, right? So how white conducts the game and proceeds with his game will decide whether that pawn is a weakness or a strength. Now, a couple of things. The most thematic concerns of this central pawn is that either you should put pieces um, on the squares which is supported by the pawn, right? So that would be e5 and c5, or this pawn will get to push, right? And then the resulting exchange of pawns in the center will leave white with a much better control over the whole board. So these are like the main themes of isolated queen pawn. Either you push the pawn to d5, exchange it, and after the exchanges, one of your pieces lands on the d5 square, from where your piece will control both the queen side and king side, or you get to put pieces on e5 and c5 and exert pressure to some more strategical squares, like let's say f7, the f7 square. Or from c5, you can also put pressure on the b7 square, right? So strategically, it gives you some some good advantages, and that's what we are going to see in this game. Um, Again, this is a chess talk, so this is more of a generalized talk than anything else. We're not going to be talking about end game or middle game or anything of those sorts, though both of these things will be covered in today's game. It's more of an analysis session, right? So you see a game, you analyze it, and we learn from we learn from the analysis, right? So I guess this is black to play. An unfortunate thing has occurred, which is my machine is uh, showing an application not responding error. So please bear with me for these technical issues. All right. So seems like we're back. Um, Sorry about those things. So yeah, as I mentioned, this is black, okay? And let's see. Yeah. So as I was saying, there are strategical points on e5 and c5. Black should get to put his knight on e5 or c5 and then attack these points from e5 and c5, or push the pawn to d5 and after the mass exchanges, get his bishop or knight on d5 from where it will control the whole board. So these are the ideas. It doesn't mean white will get should execute them immediately, right? So let's see how white continues. So this position is actually black to play. So black starts with knight d7 and white plays queen f4. Now if black plays bishop e6, then white can play something like rook e1 as one way to continue, or take on e6, take on e6, and then play queen c7. Well, the thing is now it's very uncomfortable for black to move his queen because the knight on d7 is hanging, and if he moves his pawn, let's say to b5, then I believe we have the threat of playing rook to e1, and now black will have to give up the control, or will have to move his queen from where he can protect the knight. So that would be queen f5 and then queen into c6. So white will get a pawn here, right? So after queen f4, black plays bishop g6. So only two decent squares for this bishop. So bishop goes to g6. And now white will get to control the e5. So white goes h4 here. So along with the central influence, white also is trying to play on the flanks on the king side. So the central pawn on d4 is restricting black's mobility on the fifth rank. So which kind of gives white a secondary idea of playing on the king side. There's h4. Black goes queen d8. The idea is now g4 can be met by bishop into h4. Right. So black is indirectly stopping g4. White goes knight a4. As I mentioned earlier, white gets to put his knights on e5 and c5 and attack the pawns on b7 and f7. So white is just keeping his knight on a4, black plays h5. So white plays rook e1. Remember this in middle games, right? So a lot of the times players are thinking what move to play in middle games. And a good general rule of thumb is, like try to place your rooks on open files, your bishops on long diagonals, and knights on outposts. That's a very, very general rule which will sort of speed up your thinking. Like if you think you're stuck and not able to find moves for yourself, you can simply um, follow these three general rules, right? Um, um, place rooks on open files, right? The bishops go to long diagonals, and the knights go to outposts. So you have to know what an outpost is, right? So these are the general principles that you can follow for rooks, bishop, and knights. So there's a slightly different rule for queen and king. But for the king, it's pretty simple. You don't want to move the king in the middle game so much. But as you can see here, white is trying to white has placed the rook on the open file and his bishop on a long diagonal, attacking the king, and is trying to bring his knights to the outpost. So here the outpost is the c5 square and e5 square. So he has positioned his knights to come to e5 and c5, right? So that will help you optimize your time very efficiently. So if you think you're stuck, um, if you feel you're stuck, then you can use these general principles just to start moving in some direction. All right, so rook e1. Now black plays b5. So here really it's difficult for black to formulate a good plan. I believe now what would happen, let's say if black plays something like knight f8, then white's knight is coming to c5. So black has to keep his knight on d7 passively. And if black waits with moves like rook c8, then I believe white either has knight g5 or knight e5. If black takes, then obviously I can take knight g6, knight into e5, g into e5, bishop into h4, and now e6 I think is a pretty strong move. E6 is a very strong move. And this is not looking good for black. Let's say plays something like bishop f6. Can I play knight c5? And if b6 now, then knight d7. So white's pieces are infiltrating. What if I play rook c7? Still knight d7 or maybe now rook d1. And if queen f8, well, the queen cannot go to f8. The rook is under attack. So maybe something like queen c8 and then rook to d7. Oops, rook to d7, and this is not looking pleasant. Rook into d7. Well, e into d7. I can play e into d7, or even knight into d7 would be not as bad. Queen d8. Suppose now knight e5. White has some serious pressure on f7 pawn. There is no check, so bishop into e5. And now into f7 check intermezzo. Yeah, black has to go king f8. And now into e5, I believe. Bishop into f7. and then takes, queen into h5 check. Let's say he goes king g8, and this is still turning out to equal. So black has a defense here. Let's go back. White's position looks promising, but I want to see if white has a concrete way to continue here. So let's say black waits with rook c8. What can white do here? Knight e5 looks very aggressive to me, so I want to stick with knight e5. Black takes knight into e5. Um, d into e5, bishop into h4. And now, yeah, I think e6 suggests itself. White should try to play e6. Is there any other move white can play? Well, one possibility I see is knight c5, attacking the b7 pawn. If b6, then rook d1. The queen has to move to try to protect the h4 bishop. So the queen can go to g5. And black seems to be getting out of this mess. e6, rook d1. I think the problem in this position is that white's position looks promising, but I can't find anything concrete here. Let's see. Well, rook d1 can be met with queen g5. Let's see, knight c5. If b6, then maybe go knight b7. Queen g5, sorry, queen g5. And then now I'm not forced to exchange queens. Rather, I can play a move like queen d4. Oops. Queen d4. Attacking b6. If b5, then this should be strong for white. Do I play e6 or knight d6? Yes, I like e6. Now we are threatening e to f7. Yeah, now rook f8 is sort of forced. Can go. Now e7, rook e8, go queen d8. Yep. This sounds very, very good. If queen into e7, then I can take queen into e8 check, and white will get a rook here, right? And if rook into d8, well then e into d8, queen into d8, knight into d8, bishop into d8, and I again get the full piece after rook e8 check. Well, this seems to be working. So let's go over this. Bishop into h4, knight c5, b6, then knight b7. So let's go knight b7. If queen g5, then I have queen d4. I think queen d4 is a good move. Because after queen d4, all of black's pieces are like cramped on the king's side. I mean, this bishop on h4 is very badly placed. It is not attacking any good squares, and its scope is also limited by the queen. So the queen and bishops are fighting amongst each other for the control of squares, whereas white's pieces are controlling much broader area of the board. So the bishop is attacking the king, the queen is literally covering the whole board. So we are threatening queen d7, queen into b6. It's also keeping an eye on the bishop on h4, and at the same time protecting f2 for any shenanigans. It's also protecting the square d2, right? So it's stopping the black queen from coming to g2. So it's covering a lot of square from d4. So I really like this move, queen d4. I insert a diagram here. And yeah, I'm threatening queen into b6. I don't know what black will play here. I mean, if he plays b5, then yeah, we have e6. Now there is a concrete threat of e into f7. Right. So let's say black plays something like queen f6, and I can take e into f7, bishop into f7, bishop into f7. If king into f7, then I have queen d7 check, and I take the rook. And if he takes queen into f7, now we get to see that queen keeping the eye on the bishop. I take queen into h4. Well, actually, knight on b7 is hanging. But can I play rook e7 now? Oops, rook e7. Yeah, now there are some very strong threats here. Now rook e7, queen b6. Well, the problem with rook c7 is, let's say black plays rook c7, then I have rook e8 check. Right, so you can see that both black's major pieces are on the queen side. So this king is like left alone to defend itself. If king h7, then queen into h5 mate. If king f7, then still queen into h5 check. g6. Suppose queen h8, and now black should get mated somewhere here, or at least he will be on the hook for a very difficult game ahead. So let's say rook e7, then I have queen g8 check, king f6. Should we give rook f8 check? Or here, let's give rook f8, king e6, queen, queen f6 sounds better. If king d7, then queen d4 check, and now black's king should get mated. If king e6, rook f6 mate, and if king c7, then queen d8 mate. So after queen f6 check, black's king cannot go to d7, he'll have to go to d5. Doesn't seem good to me. Now rook d8 check, rook d7. Because if king c5, then I have queen d4 mate. Right, and if king c4, then queen c3 mate. So black has to go rook d7. It's very funny that I think black should get mated, but I don't see a mate here. But yeah, white can gain some material. So let's say queen f7 check, king d6. I go into g6 check, yeah, and I get some material. The reason I'm not considering rook e8, so rook d7, white can go rook e8, but then I think black's king escapes. So once black's king escapes to b6, then he's safe. So, and if rooks get exchanged, then also the king is safe. So before the rooks get exchanged, white has to do some sort of magic or try to pressure black. So king d6, going into g6. And this is looking good. This is looking good for white. Knife king c7. Well, we can. I'm very much positive that we can enter this pawn endgame. Now g4, right? Black plays king c7, g5, king d7. I suppose now f4, king e6, and white can simply go and collect these black pawns. So king f4, king e3. Let's see if he plays c5. Well, then I'll play king e3. Yeah, here black should be losing because eventually I'm gonna come and grab all these three pawns, and black cannot do anything because of my connected pawns. Yeah, this is winning. So yeah, let's go back to this position. So the win is slightly longer than I thought for, but it's still there. So queen into h4, queen b7, rook e7, and oops, not that. Rook c7, then yeah, rook e8 and king f7, obviously, and then queen h5, g6, queen h8, and then yeah, this rook f8 is the better choice. King e6, queen f6. King d7 is the better choice. No, king d5 is the better choice. And if king d5, then rook d8, queen f7, king d6, queen g6, and we go into a pawn endgame. If he plays king c5, something like this, then also I believe we can force the matters into a pawn endgame, or at the least a superior major piece ending. Queen here, king here, take, and yeah, again I have g4. Alright, first bring the king. Right. c5, king e2, c4, king e3. Yeah, if he plays king e6, king e3, king d5, g4, I believe this should win. Because eventually I'm going to distract black's king from the center. Right? It's here g6, and this is winning. And if he goes king e6, then yeah, king d4, and this is winning. So the pawn endgame is always winning. So what remains is to see if queen b6 is a better choice. So let's see, rook e7, queen b6. Now, my plan was to play queen g5, but now black has a defense with queen d4. So I'll have to do something slightly different, which is the queen b6 is a better move for sure. Yeah, Queen d4 is a very strong defensive resource, and now black is in fact threatening rook f8 and attacking f2. This will let black activate his pieces, which I definitely don't like. I don't like this. Yeah, I mean, when I say I don't like this, what I mean is white's position is still better, but I think there is a better choice for white. So white is still better. If white just takes on h5, rook f8, and maybe plays something, like if he comes back to h4, I think white is still better. He has a slight edge advantage. Yeah, but it's not as big as I thought it would be. So I'd like white to be much, much more better. So maybe we can improve on white's play beforehand. Yeah, so in this position, how about we first go knight d6 right after rook f7. If queen d7, well then I believe white can simply play rook d1. Whoops, not that. Rook d1. And now we have a double attack. And black cannot protect against this. But you can play rook d8. I think I think black is still safe here. Black is still safe. Yeah, the after queen into f7, the best is, yeah, at this point the best is queen into h4, queen into b7. Ah, yeah, rook e7, queen b6, and black should be doing fine here. I mean, black should be able to defend um, reasonably well. All right, so let's go back and check how white could have improved. Um, Queen f6, right? So yeah, take on f7, bishop takes f7. How about this? First, let's take on f6, bishop into f6, and now bishop into f7. Now we get a piece or a rook. If king into f7, then I will get a rook. If it doesn't take, then we are a piece up. Okay, so I think that's the recalibration there. So instead of taking bishop into f7 now, after which black will play queen into f7, where white is still better but not as much better, doing an intermezzo with queen into f6 is, will take care of things. Here white will end up with a decisive material advantage. Alright, let's go back. So this pawn on e file seems very strong, right? And if black plays something like rook f8, then yeah, we have this e7 and massive queen d8. And if rook e8, then just e into f7, bishop into f7, and rook e8. This bishop is under pen, right? Bishop is under pen. All right, e6 seems like a very strong move, and I think we are good at this point. Yeah, so this looks pretty good for white. This is pretty good for white. All right. So let's go back to the starting of the game. So here instead of rook c8, black goes b5. Um, b5, and now white goes knight c3, queen b8. Well, the knight c5 move doesn't make any more sense, right? Because knight c5, then just take, and there is um, no weakness for black. So knight c3 keeps the pawn on c6 backward. So I think knight c3 is a better move. Now the pawn on c6 is also a backward pawn on the c file. And the best bet for black is to exchange the queen. So black says queen b8, and white says, yeah, right, queen e3. So definitely not exchanging pieces. Black tries to create a counterattack on the queen side with b5, b4, knight e4, b into a3, takes, b into a3. Alright, so black has managed to exchange one pair of minor pieces, which kind of exchanging pieces helps the defensive side, but it doesn't mean that the attack is over. It just means that white will have to work slightly bit harder to create more attacking opportunities. Anyway, I think white still, like white pieces are well positioned. The bishop is on this massive diagonal, and it's creating pressure on the f7 pawn. The knight is always ready to jump to e5 outpost. Again, from e5, it can attack f7 as well as g6. And the rook is sitting on an open file. So white's pieces are well placed. Let's look at black's pieces. Black's pieces, well, bishop and knight are active. This knight can come to d5 to block the bishop on b3. The bishop on g6 is controlling a few squares on the queen side, though there is not a lot of action on the queen side, but it is protecting the important f7 square. So there is that. So both of the minor pieces are active, but they are more in the defensive role than an attacking role. So they are active, but they are on the but they're defending. The rook on a8 is simply not doing anything. It's pretty passive, and the queen on b8 is also like on the edge of the board, again passive. So let's take a look at this. Queen b8. White still has a better position, so now let's see how white continues the game. B into a3, black plays knight d5. Oops, plays knight d5. Yeah, now the knight is I'm blocking the bishop, so and at this point the queen cannot move any square to protect the b3 bishop. So he has to take the knight, take it, knight e5. Alright, so again the character of the position has changed. Now we have gone from an isolated queen pawn to double isolated queen pawn. So this is like a symmetrical structure. And we have entered a position where it's knight versus the bishop. And the activity of the major pieces will make the difference, if any, right? So let's see how white continued from this point onwards. This is a very instructive position, I feel. This is because getting to play A slightly passive position or a slightly better position is a very important skill as we start playing stronger opposition. Black goes queen d8, activates his queen, and gives white the choice to take on g6. I think white's knight on e5 is much better than the bishop on g6, so white should not try to rush into that. Queen f3. Yeah, what queen f3 is achieving is that white is keeping an eye on the d5 square, so the black queen will be passive for that. Rook a6, rook c1. So since the knight is on e5, um, rook can't do much on the e-file, so the rook is going to c5. King h7, very interesting move. Queen into h4 is an interesting move to consider at this point. So let's see what happens after queen into h4. Queen into d5. Now white is threatening something very serious, which is white gets an extra move. White will take knight into g6, rook into g6, rook c8 check, king h7, and queen into f7. Yeah. Or he can also go rooks knight into f7 first, bishop into f7, rook c8 check, king h7, and then take on f7. Much better than putting the rook on g6. Yeah. So queen into d5, king h7. Yeah, black goes king h7. The idea being if knight into f7, then take, rook f6. Yes, yes. Yeah, see, when the rook is on c8, rook f6 is not a good possibility because then we have queen g8 check. Right, with the rook on c8 we get the check, but with sorry, but with rook on c1 we don't get that. Right, so knight f7 would be a mistake here due to rook f6. Right, so black preemptively goes king f7, and now knight f3. Yes, knight f3 makes sense. And g4, check, king h6, and now takes. Now the queen has gone from h4 and white gets a pawn here. It's slight advantage for white. Yeah. Queen into h4, queen to d5. So instead of king h7, I was considering what if rook f6, but this is much worse because now white. Yeah, white gives check, king h7, now knight f3, queen goes to g4, now rook t8, rook c8, sorry. And the tragedy is that now I'm threatening mate on h8. If the bishop goes to d3, then I go queen h8 check, king g6, and knight e5 check. It's pretty sad. And if in the previous position, instead of queen g4, let's say black goes to queen f4, still the same thing. Though there is no 4, black is still not doing well. King g6, now we have knight e5 check, goes king f5, then we have queen into h5 check, and black's pieces are really badly placed. Yeah, with the bishop on d3, I can take knight into d3, so um, black can play bishop b1, again queen h8, king g6, knight d5, forced, queen into h5. Yeah, and if king e6, I believe black's king should get mated somehow, or just queen into his, uh, let's say rook e8, king d5, so king d5, then knight d3 check, king d6. I think this will still end in like some disaster, knight c4. Yeah, and mate I at the second move. Yeah, this is also not gaining well for black. So the observation, the conclusion here is that if the queen moves from the back rank, black has a sorry, white has a very powerful attack on the back. Black cannot give up the control of the back rank. So most of this is also slightly advanced for me. Like if you're having trouble, difficulty following this, I can assure you that this is also slightly advanced for me. King h7 and white plays queen h3. Is protecting the h4 pawn and also threatening rook c8. Rook b6. So why not rook c8? Maybe rook c6 at this point. Just improve the position. Maybe. Also threatening knight into g6 and queen g3. There are some ideas here. Let's say black goes something like rook b8. Queen g3, rook b1, king h2. And if queen e8, then I go rook c7. or even rook d6 and try to grab this pawn. Bishop e4, then rook d7, attack f7 pawn. If f6, then there is mate. Right? And if bishop g6, well, then they rook into d5. So yeah, I mean, I guess white has a way to penetrate his pieces into black's territory. And if once that starts happening, then black's position starts to collapse. So at this point, what white is trying to do, I'm assuming, is he's positioning his pieces in such a way so that he can penetrate his rook into the black's position. His knight is already well placed on e5. The queen is a long range piece, so it can hop onto d7 or c7 at any point. What remains to do is to put the rook on d7 or c7. Right, then white is golden. So very interesting. So black doesn't bother. He creates his own counterattack with rook b6. Black is saying, I'll create my own counterattack with rook b1. White goes rook c8, queen d6, queen g3. The idea here is that after rook b1, king h2, white has the threat of playing rook h8 check. King h8, then knight into f7 and take the queen. So like a simple, just keeping some tactical options open. a4, rook a8. So he's circling a pawn and d pawn. King e6, and he gets an extra pawn. Wow, into a4. I'm wondering why not rook a6 in this position. So there is annotation here that knight into f7. The idea is if you take queen into g3, then there is rook h8 mate. Right. So knight into f7. I'm threatening mate. Bishop into whoops. Bishop into f7. Then queen d3 check, and I take the rook. So hidden tactics in the position. Queen d3 and I take the rook. So hidden tactics. Very, very interesting. Okay, 6 is not queen e6. And now, after queen e6, rook into a4, queen f5. So white gets a pawn here. Very, very instructive technique. And I really liked how white played earlier in this game. Rook a7, rook b1 check, king h2, rook c1. And the game continued, but I believe white already has a big advantage here. White has an extra pawn, which is a big advantage in positions like this. So, what I want to do here is, like we can see how the game progressed from this point onwards. But for me, the result of the game is pretty much determined at this point, right? So at this point, I can safely say that white will win. We can see how to win such positions in a different setting, and that would be the topic for how to win technical positions, right? So this is a technical position now. White is a pawn up, white is materially up, his pieces are more active, and this is now turning into a more of a technical position than a contested position, right? This is not a contested position anymore. So what I want to do at this point is go back to the start of the start of this game, or the position from where we started, where the position still looked contested. and how white navigated the game from a contested position to a technical position, right? See, the goal of every player, regardless of level, like it can be a very beginner level player, an amateur player, or a grandmaster or a world champion. They're trying to bring a position from a contested nature, like from a contested position where it's not obvious who is better, or it's not even obvious what to play, to a position where things are more clear, where you have a clear understanding of who is better, white or black, and it is more of like a textbook or an algorithmic way of play that is required, right? So we want to go from a contested or an unclear position to a clear position. That's what every chess player in the world, regardless of their level, amateur, beginner, they're trying to do that, right? Now, the difference in the level comes due to what is clear and unclear. See, for a beginner player, if I give him an extra pawn, the beginner player is not guaranteed to win. He's gonna make a few blunders. He's gonna blunder a queen or a rook or a few minor pieces along the way, right? If you speak of, let's say, someone like a master, like a national master or a FIDE master, for them giving an extra pawn or two pawns is sufficient to win, right? So they have enough skill to win with extra two pawns. For a grandmaster, you don't need even need like two pawns or even a pawn. All you need is like a strategical square, a strategical advantage. Let's say a rook on the seventh rank, a knight on an outpost, or an extra side outside post, or an extra outside passed pawn, and then he's gonna win, right? So this is a technical position. Let's go back to the start of the game, a contested position, and let's see how the game went. Um, so white starts with queen f4, bishop g6, h4, queen d8. This is knight a4. So as I said, that queen pawn means you want to put your pieces on the outpost. So white is trying to put his knight on c5 or e5, and then puts his rook on the open file, comes back, does not exchanges the queens, and exchanges one pair of minor pieces. After knight d5, forced, and now from here onwards, it's still slightly contested, but I like this move queen f3. Then I like this move rook c1. And I like this move queen h3. It looks very mechanic, like robotic kind of play. Rook c8, queen g3, and now he goes rook 8, and he takes the pawn. So yeah, if you want to try understand what white did, I would suggest you go over the last 1 hour of recording, and I think you should be good. All right, so I think this is one of my last chess talks on this platform. Next month I'll be doing probably sessions on calculation exercise. So I'll see you then. Thank you.